welcome to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. I am your host, Leon Wolf. Today is Thursday, April the 9th of 2015, and we are glad that you have decided to join us tonight. I'm delighted, as always, to be joined by a full panel of my regular co-hosts. Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute is with us, as always. Neal of the Federalist, glad that he is here. Jeff Blehar of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk is here. F. McMorris is getting dressed in the background from the Washington Free Beacon, and we are glad that he is here and prompt and prepared as usual. Our guest host for the week, also from the Washington Free Beacon, is Lachlan Markay, and we're glad to have Lachlan with us this week. Let's jump right into the news. We're going to start off with a little bit of 2016 talk. Of course, the big news of the week is the announcement of the Rand Paul campaign. Really fairly well anticipated. Nobody views this as a surprise, but Rand Paul has officially thrown his hat into the ring. And he's had an interesting first 24 hours of his campaign. And our first question, as always, is going to go to the guest, and that's going to be to Lachlan. If you think about Rand Paul's first 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours now, Lachlan, let's see, he's gotten in an argument with Hannity. He got in an argument with Savannah Guthrie on the Today Show. He got into it with an AP reporter. You know, kind of some mixed reviews. Some of those he's praised for, some of those not so much. How would you rate day one of the Rand Paul 2016 campaign?
I think it went well just because of his answer to this abortion question that I think it was an AP reporter was asking. You know, it was kind of like I mean, I'm not even a big Rand Paul fan, and I saw him give this answer, and it's the answer that we've all been waiting for Republican candidates to give to the abortion question since at least Todd Aiken went and opened his mouth. So, you know, I think it went well for him, and, you know, you're kind of noticing a pattern of, you know, this narrative has been built since he's been getting these tough questions and being, you know, testy with reporters and so on, that he's, you know, basically what's going on inside America's newsrooms is not going on what's going on inside the, and I know that's not a surprise, but, you know, if you were to read the headlines, you'd think he didn't have a very good first 24 hours, and a lot of liberal blogs were saying that today, like, you know, Rand Paul stumbles out of the gate, and he gets off to a bad start, and so on. I think conservatives have been ecstatic about what they've seen over the last 24 hours, so, yeah, I'm happy. As someone who's not a big Rand Paul fan, I'm happy.
So, Neal, next question goes to you, and I guess if you look at kind of the arguments that Rand Paul has had and scuffles that he's gone into, I think that Lachlan is right that the scuffle with the AP reporter comes off to Rand Paul's benefit. But I think, to me, the Savannah Guthrie fight on the Today Show was probably the most high-profile of Rand's appearances, and also probably the most controversial. And in fact, not just that he got into it with her, but kind of the attitude and the demeanor that he took with Savannah Guthrie have led some to claim, some who probably weren't going to give Rand a fair shake in the first place, but have led a number of people to claim that he's got a problem with women reporters, especially after the dust-up that he got with CNBC's Kelly Evans. You remember he basically shushed her. Sure. Yeah, he shushed her in the middle of the question.
Right.
You think there's anything to that? And if so, how can Paul overcome these problems, even if they're perception problems?
Well, you know, I've never personally met the senator, so I couldn't really tell you if he has an issue with women reporters. He certainly is going to have a perception issue because if you give the media a crumb, they will run with it, and so that they are going to take this, they're going to take the shush moment, and they're going to make as much hay as they can while the sun shines. So he is going to have to kind of mind his behavior for a little while, I would say, just kind of be conscious of that. But I don't think there's any evidence that he has a problem with women reporters. You know, I think he probably has a problem with stupid questions from reporters. Again, you see this in the answer to the abortion question. I'm actually not a huge Rand fan, but I am excited to have him in this race. Again, like Lachlan said, just his answer to the abortion question, and sort of, I think the other thing is his overall libertarian perspective, I think, is valuable to have in the mix. So I'm eager to see what he does. I do think he's going to have to kind of watch himself as far as his conduct with women reporters.
And we can tell that you're excited for the Rand candidacy. As Scott has pointed out in the chat window, you're honoring him with the Rand Paul hairdo tonight. Very well done, Neal.
You know, this is what I do when I just, you know, need to be on television in 15 minutes and haven't prepared.
All right, Jeff, let's go to you next. I think that I guess the question is do you think that this kind of tactic from Rand, which is essentially to be a jerk and bristly with reporters, is going to work in the final analysis? I mean, if you look at 2012, Newt Gingrich had some level of success with that in the primary, but if Rand truly believes that he's going to go to the general, doesn't he have to learn how to treat? I mean, look, nobody cares if you're a jerk to the AP reporter, but if you go off on Savannah Guthrie on Today, that reaches a different audience. I mean, isn't that potentially going to impact him in the general?
It might. It might. It obviously is the easy and safe answer. But, I was actually talking with Beckett Adams about this just about an hour before we went on the air, about this exact subject. And this is something that I've been focusing on for a while, that everybody talking about, oh, Rand's had a rough rollout. No, he hasn't. When you beat up on the mainstream media, you are doing God's work as far as the GOP base is concerned. And as you very correctly pointed out, Newt Gingrich is a perfect example of that in 2012. He got so much credit for being the guy who would take issue with the question. He would question the premise. A guy who's willing to question the premise of a question is something that people in the GOP base have been crying out for years now. But here's the difference. And this is I want to credit Beckett for this, because he pointed me to these Gallup polls that show that it's not just Republicans or conservatives who are becoming more disillusioned with their opinions with regard to the mainstream media. It's everybody. It's across the board. It's moderate, Republican curious people, even liberals. The progressives, they still have a touching level of trust in the media, which is really funny, actually. But everybody else, with each successive media scandal, disgrace, including the Rolling Stone thing, which we'll get to later on in the show, the bashing of the media becomes less of a GOP base play for a candidate and more of something that actually has general election appeal. Now, you can't ride that to the presidency. You have to have substance. But I think actually I want to echo what Neal said. As long as Rand is careful not to go too much over the top, he doesn't want to turn into Chris Christie, who kind of took that whole beating up on the reporters shtick to the point where it just became the only thing he was known for, and he just seemed like a hulking bully. Christie's size probably also played a role in that as well. But as long as Rand doesn't do that, a healthy willingness to question the premises of loaded questions to him is going to make him go far. And it's actually going to help him gain ground among demographics in the GOP primary base that otherwise might not give him a look.
So, Scott, there was a great article in Reason yesterday that laid forth the point, look, Rand Paul, what he brings to the table is that within the context of a GOP primary, he's kind of a weird guy, right? He's off the beaten path, not just in what he believes, but kind of in the way that he conducts himself. He conducts himself as a younger candidate. He's more eager to use sarcasm and kind of young expressions. And there's been some evidence that he's really already trying to soften that as he actually rolls out his presidential campaign. I mean, he said actually in his announcement speech that he wanted to raise defense spending by $190 billion. He's making the hawk noises on Iran. I mean, is this the right thing for Rand to do, is to try to soften up, to make himself more appealable to the middle of the GOP? Or should he just be more comfortable in his skin and see where the chips would fall?
Yeah, look, I'm not the one running the focus groups, and Reason Magazine isn't either, God bless him. And the idea that he can stay as weird as he has been, and being a libertarian, I enjoy the weirdness, and I think that he's great for the debate, and I wish him well. That said, there are certain positions that he is that are not going to score him points. And if he really wants to win, and I think Rand's in it to win it. I don't think he's in it to bolster his position in the Senate or raise money. I think he's really in it to win it. And because of that, look, he's going to make some moves that are going to piss off his libertarian friends, whether it be on defense spending or whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to cost him a lot of votes. I think it's going to cost him some points in the media, and by the media I mean both the ones that are out to get him and the ones that deep down really love him. But I don't think it's going to. I think these are focused group moves. And strategic moves. I think that he's really concerned and rightfully about being the only dove on the stage on foreign policy, and so he's going to have to make some strategic plays to counter that. Now, for those of us like me who think that there are systemic problems with U.S. defense spending that can't be solved by just adding more zeros to the budget, that's annoying. But look, man, politics is annoying, and we should get used to it.
So one more quick question before I go to Bill, to you. How do you think that Paul navigates this kind of wacky Kentucky law that says that he essentially can't run for president and Senate at the same time? Do you think that he mounts a legal challenge to that? And if so, is he successful, or does he just give up his Senate seat?
No, I think that if push comes to shove, he's made enough friends with guys like Mitch McConnell and in the Kentucky GOP that he's going to figure out a way to finesse that. I'm not really worried about it. Honestly, these guys always kind of seem to figure that out, and so I'm not worried that he's gonna need to just say damn the torpedoes.
Hey, I just want to jump in here. I've actually looked into this a little bit, and I actually know what will happen, or what is at least tipped to happen in Kentucky with respect to the whole can't be on the ballot thing. Maybe some of you also have seen this. That what the idea here is that they're going to move from a primary in Kentucky to a caucus for the Senate, so that Rand Paul technically will not be on two ballots because there won't be a ballot for one of them. There will just be a caucus. Therefore, they're going to, they will violate the spirit of the law, but they will not violate the letter of the law.
Right.
And you've got to know that Mitch McConnell behind the scenes is pulling every string that he can to make that happen, and he has a lot of friends in Kentucky.
All right, so Bill, let's talk a little bit about Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, of course, he announced a week before Rand, and he raised $31 million, either for his campaign or his affiliated super PACs in the first week. An astonishing, record-breaking take, and has now, by most polls, by several national polls, kind of vaulted himself into the top tier of the GOP challengers nationwide, probably a couple points behind the Bush-Walker tier. I mean, is it time to take Cruz seriously as a force in the primary right now, as a guy who might actually win, as opposed to a guy who's just there to carry a message?
No.
Would you like to use the balance of your time to talk about Matt Harvey's start today?
No. I actually didn't watch the Mets game, believe it or not. But when we're looking at Ted Cruz, I hate the insider baseball beltway type reporting that equates raking in campaign donations with instant competitiveness. I don't think that his campaign take thus far is reflective of general grassroots support that's actually going to carry him over the line. I think he appeals to a certain demographic that will not be able to coalesce behind him to make him competitive in any of the primary states, let alone Iowa. But my hat's off to him for using his wife's connections at various investment banks and financial firms and his Harvard connections to raise a pretty penny. So good on you, Ted Cruz, for showing that you can raise some money.
But that having been said, I mean, look, money's nice, right? I mean, that's why they call it money. So regardless of whether it indicates...
We don't know what money is. It's ridiculous.
Right. But regardless of whether you think that it indicates any kind of broad-based level of support, or whether it's indicative of his connection with certain people who have a lot of money, I mean, it is going to enable him to kind of stay in the game and be on television and put in organization longer than a lot of people who might otherwise drop out.
Is all this money, okay, this was raised by super PACs, so here's the question I have. How much of this money is actually going to go to Ted Cruz, and how much of it is going to go to administrative costs and pay people's salaries?
Well, I definitely don't know the answer to that, Neal. But...
I mean, much like Joy over here, I actually dug into this situation, and I was able to figure out where that money is going to go. So Ted Cruz, his spending plan is to lay out about 20% in Iowa alone, and then after he drops out of the race, he's going to dump it into Ben Carson's super PAC, and that's what's going to make Carson take him over the top in New Hampshire and South Carolina, and on to the rest of the nomination.
It's genius.
You know, we're actually
You figured it out, Bill. Yeah.
we're not going to go. No, we're not going to know where the money is coming from and where it's going to until I think it's June or July,
Right.
the next FEC deadline for reporting all this stuff. So, you know, my question today, and I don't, you know, I don't want to make the accusation necessarily, but it's worth pondering whether it would be in Ted Cruz's interests or in the interests of these super PACs, which he's officially prohibited from coordinating with, to actually lie about their fundraising haul early on. Maybe when it comes out that they didn't raise that much, they play it off on some misinterpretation of a quote in the media or so on.
Huh.
You know, that gets him over a stumbling block right out of the gate where no one's really taking him seriously. You know, he attracts a lot more small dollar support between now and that fundraise and that FEC deadline, and he's considered a serious contender then. And you know, these super PACs, you know, it's a total embarrassment for them. He loses a lot of face in that sense. But arguably,
I mean, look,
you know, he comes out on top. I don't know.
He is. I mean, look, and there's been 3 national polls that have been taken since he got into the race, and he's been in 3rd place in all 3. And I think that he's. I mean, whether you think this is a flash in the pan or not, and probably it is. I mean, he has established some level of kind of actual voter support, at least as it's determined in responses to polls. But let's go back to Lachlan, and I want to talk a little bit about Rand. Let's talk. Scott, you got something you want to jump in with here?
Yeah, real quick. I think that what you and Lachlan just said is important and needs to be just spelled out a little bit. Regardless of how he's going to spend the money, regardless of whether we think the money is real, and regardless of the idiotic things that Bill said, the reality is that this number plays. It plays among the people paying attention. I had multiple people who are donors to Republican campaigns, who work on Republican campaigns, email me today and say, holy crap, did you see the number he pulled? And it gives him street cred, regardless of how well we think he's going to do and whether he's really in this to win it. The fact is that this number plays. And so, you know, I think that it's valuable in that alone. Whether it has any greater value than that, you know, who knows?
All right, Lachlan. So let's go back to you. Let's talk a little bit more about Rand. There was a Q poll that was released either yesterday or the day before, and what they did was they took the states Colorado, Iowa, and Virginia, 3 kind of swing states, and they pulled head-to-head matchups between Rand versus Hillary, Cruz versus Hillary, Walker versus Hillary, and Jeb Bush versus Hillary. What's interesting to me in this poll is that Rand Paul polled the best against Hillary in all 3 of those states of any of the candidates, and by outside the margin of error in some cases. I mean, clearly outperformed the other candidates, which was very surprising to me. I mean, look, I look at Rand and I see a weird guy who's going to have a lot of trouble connecting with middle-of-the-road people. But, I mean, is it time to take seriously his claim that was kind of laughed at in a lot of circles that he's the best guy to win in the general election?
I mean, I don't want to go all skewed polls again because we went through that exercise a few years ago. But I think
Hey, the polls were skewed in 2014, so they can be skewed again.
I mean, I think you're gonna see more support for Paul on paper than you will at the ballot box. You know, just because of a lot of his supporters are not demographics that are particularly inclined to particularly high turnout numbers. And I think, you know, he's got a very big contrast with Hillary Clinton, probably arguably a bigger contrast than any other Republican candidate. I don't think that means he's the best candidate to run against Hillary, but I do think that means you're going to see sort of more stark poll numbers in his direction, just because of issues where he's sort of drawing, you know, a clear line between him and the other side. You know, I think you see some of those people who are sort of on the fence about some of this stuff come back towards the middle as the primaries go on.
All right, Neal, last 2016 question. One of the things that was interesting to me is, you know, you go and you look at the Rand Paul store, the items that are for sale in the Rand Paul store. First of all, I think that his campaign shirts and apparel are heads and shoulders above any other campaign shirts I've ever seen. I mean, if it weren't for the fact they said Rand Paul on them or supported Rand Paul, I would buy several of these items. But they're also kind of an assortment of bizarre items. I mean, you had the NSA spy cam blocker, signed copies of the Constitution that he's selling for $1,000. People had kind of an issue with that. Rand Paul flip-flops, which, given his evolving stances on many foreign policy issues, was kind of ironic. But what do you make of some of these more bizarre items in the Rand Paul story? You think those end up becoming a problem or an issue, or are they just kind of fun, quirky items in keeping with his personality?
Certainly, I think they're just going to be fun, quirky items. I don't think they'll be a serious issue. I mean, who really buys that garbage?
Yeah, but selling a Constitution for $1,000.
Oh, well, no, I mean that's a little weird. I mean, he did sign it, but is he really worth $1,000? I mean, I might pay $25 for a signed Constitution from.
I'll have you know, I bought that $1,000 Rand Paul Constitution, and I think his signature is equally as valuable as John Hancock's. All right, so I don't like this slander.
Remind me never to retain you for counsel. But here's the thing. I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I do think it's sort of, politicians sort of got the message that they shouldn't take themselves that seriously. You had Marco Rubio's, infamous sip of water, and then he was making jokes about needing a drink for the next, God knows he's still doing it. But it's one of those things where we on the right sort of have this understanding these men are just human, or women. Let me be 21st century here. They're just human beings. They're not demigods or anything like that. And so, no, I don't think it's going to be. I think it's just kind of in keeping with the general tone of right-leaning politics these days, which is, these guys are just normal fellas running for president.
All right, let's move on and talk a little bit about the fallout from the Rolling Stone situation. Sabrina Rubin Early, of course, the Columbia Journalism Review issued a rather scathing report on her reporting practices. And Jeff, I'm going to take the first question over to you. One of the things that they specifically criticized her for, and one of the things that she's been criticized in a lot of quarters for, Eric Wemple at the Washington Post, a lot of the people who have been following this story from the beginning have said, look, one of the things she did that was wrong was that she was fact shopping, right? She had a story and she went looking for facts to support it. And specifically what they point out is that there were other kind of less sensational but yet more reliable rape stories that she passed over in favor of the more sensational story at UVA. Of course, the rape that she recounted was an especially brutal affair, which, as we now know, likely did not occur. I guess I have a two-part question. Number one, I mean, how legitimate is it if that? How legitimate of a criticism is that, given the kind of journalism that Sabrina Rubin Early does? I mean, she's not a news reporter for the New York Times. This sort of long-form writing is kind of essentially her, her bailiwick. I mean, she is looking for things that generate these kind of long, multiple-page stories that provide a compelling tale. I mean, would we therefore hold her to a different standard in terms of this level of story shopping and fact shopping than we would from an ordinary reporter from a normal newspaper like the New York Times?
So that's point A. Did you have a second part?
Well, I guess point B is how common. I mean, isn't this really essentially what a lot of reporters do? Isn't this basically 95% of at least what this kind of reporter does?
Well, I do not know if this is what most reporters do. But what we do know is that, no, I'm not inclined to cut Sabrina Rubin Early any kind of breaks that wouldn't be cut any other reporter in the mainstream media, or in any media for that matter. The simple fact that we have a person here who has a narrative impulse that they are insisting on, the other day I referred to it as a Procrustean bed. This is a Greek illusion. It's the myth of Procrustes. He had the bed, and anybody who came by, he would try to fit them into it. If they were too tall for it, he'd chop off their legs. If they were too short for it, they would stretch them out to make it fit. Sabrina Early had a frame, and every story she has written, every big story that she has written since 2011 has fitted into the same frame. And the frame is this. It's very simple. And you actually, by the way, Leon, covered this very well, and we'll get to that in a second. The frame is this. A victim gets raped, okay? Then, after that victim is raped, they have been raped or they have been abused by a certain liberal bête noire. In the first case, it was the Catholic Church. Then it was the military. Now it's the fraternity system. Finally, and this is the most important part, I think, for her, this is the part that gets her to write these stories, is that their cries fell on deaf ears. Nobody was listening to them. And this is what she likes to write about. You, Leon, I know you're a humble man, you wrote a fantastic story the other day on Red State talking about how the fact that Sabrina Erdely's earlier report on the, it was called The Rape of Petty Officer Bloomer. This is the story about a woman, a military woman who had been raped. She claimed she had been raped, when she was going on a night out, and then the military did not treat her claim seriously, and she was disciplined. She cried for help. Nobody answered. You went and did what nobody else actually did. You re-reported the story. You contacted people, and you found out that basically every single thing that we have accused Sabrina Erdely of doing in this Rolling Stone UVA rape case, she had done before in this military case. And I'll bet if anybody bothered to go back and re-report the Catholic Church case, the Philly Catholic Church case, we would find the same thing. She had a designated victim. She had a designated villain. She had a narrative. She didn't care about it. This is not any sort of recognizable journalistic standard. I don't care if you write for a magazine or for a newspaper. It's my disgust with her is basically something I'm not capable of putting into words right now. I'm going to let one of you guys do a better job of it than I can.
All right, so Bill, Rolling Stone publisher Jan Werner has been kind of criticized by some people for playing ostrich, essentially with the problems in the magazine, saying that the problem really is just that Jackie...
By the way, Leon, it's Jan Wenner, not Jan Werner.
This is America. It's Jan Werner. So so Bill, see, he's been criticized. He says, look, Jackie was just an exceptionally good liar. We got taken. It happens. And people have been piling on saying, no, the problem was you had these systematic failures of reporting, you didn't contact the other side, and so on and so forth. Look, I've been involved in litigation, and probably Scott and Jeff can back me up here, where I've seen news reports on litigation that I was personally participating in, where I've seen reporters write about things that have happened. They did not contact me. I called the client. Did anybody from this newspaper contact you? Did they get this information from you? No, nobody ever talked to me. They don't talk to either side of the story. I mean, look, is there a point to what Werner is saying that, look, the problem with Rolling Stone is that they got caught? I mean, this standard, this idea that journalists contact both sides every story by they print it, isn't that just really a fantasy when you get right down to it?
Well, it's important to remember the context here. Rolling Stone publishes feature journalism, and the standards of proof there are generally very different than your typical wire reporter, your typical New York Times beat writer. I mean, Rolling Stone landed on the map with guys like Hunter S. Thompson, who published zero truth to his articles, but was still hailed and praised as a hero for capturing, the general larger truth. And Sabrina Erdely is just falling into that same line of journalism. The problem is that when you approach feature writing like this, I'm a feature writer, but I recognize that in today you can't just make stuff up like you once could. You can't exaggerate how many drugs you were taking and how brutal this rape is. You actually have to ground your pieces in reality. And if you go back and look at what Sabrina Erdely has written about military rapes, and my other favorite one was the twice weekly Catholic churchgoer who is also a prostitute with a GED from Rutgers whose dad was killed by the mob. Yeah. All of this stuff reads like a bad fiction. Stuff that you couldn't sell to a dime store novel publisher if you pitched it as fiction. So instead you repurpose it as nonfiction the way every modern fabulist has, from Stephen Glass to gosh, there's so many.
Joe Biden? Hillary Clinton?
No, Joe Biden's a plagiarist. That's way different. But see, these modern facts, they take bad fiction, they put it into a premise that confirms, that creates a confirmation bias for anyone who touches it, and they get by without ever touching a fact and never being called on it. I'm actually very surprised it took this long for her to actually get caught in our modern internet culture, where say what you will about Twitter, and I despise Twitter, but they did a very good job. People like you, Leon, people like First Team Tommy on Twitter, who instantly call BS on stories like this. So it's good to see that feature writing has to be grounded in fact again instead of pleasant fiction for the left.
Yeah, but let me add. I mean, I think one of the reasons why she didn't get caught, assuming allegedly all that kind of good disclaimer that previous stories were fabricated, is the subject matter she's writing about was so sensitive, and particularly given the culture that has come up around it, that people were afraid to raise doubts. That in the UVA case. Recall that the original reporters in the UVA case, the ones that originally expressed some skepticism, were immediately vilified as being rape apologists and all these other horrible things. Meanwhile, I went to UVA. I was in the fraternity system there. There are back channel emails going on along the same time going, this just doesn't sound right. Doesn't sound like anything we've ever heard of.
We're all very surprised, Scott.
Yeah, I know. I none of you'll believe that. But anyway, the fact is that there were a lot of this type of discussion going that would never say publicly, could never express any sort of public skepticism, but none of this ever sounded like anything anybody had ever heard of. But because of that subject matter, that skepticism didn't get aired publicly.
Obviously with the rape culture craze and the trigger warning craze on college campuses right now, people are taught, and I would imagine, I didn't go to J school, but I would imagine at J school this is a pillar of the rape journalism platform that, it's actually not good to ask, to really press rape victims on what happened to them. That's, that's you're re-traumatizing them. So I don't know, Scott, you may have more insight in this than I do, but there's now apparently also there's a school of law that's rape law, in other words, not just criminal law, it's rape law. Right. And there was a story a few weeks ago about students at the university, is escaping my mind now, who were complaining about the lack of trigger warnings or the triggering effects of rape law classes. And the question immediately comes to mind, if rape is triggering, why in the hell would you study rape law? And the same thing goes with rape journalism. If your constitution and your morals as a journalist forbid you from asking questions of rape victims, then you shouldn't be covering rape, because that's pretty essential to the telling of that story. Yeah. So there's this whole sort of cottage industry that is kind of antithetical to the very sort of basic pillars of journalism that are needed to cover the events that people who are most passionate about it are covering, and who are therefore least likely to ask those sorts of questions.
Yeah, and just of course to add, it's not just antithetical to the journalism, but it totally undermines real victims of these heinous crimes. That if you have a culture that never expresses any skepticism about anything, then you're creating a situation that we've had here at UVA that can possibly backfire so badly that real victims are going to get pushed aside, and it's really an awful trend.
Well, let me stay on that point with you here, Scott, because to me, all the people who kind of had anger at those who were questioning Eardley's reporting at the beginning of this are missing what I consider to be an important point, which is that if you're peddling the narrative, which Eardley clearly has over the years, that if you report a rape, people will not act on it and or they will lash out against you, doesn't that discourage people from reporting rapes? Because that's a real problem. I mean, right, the problem of rape being underreported is a real problem. And to me, maybe I'm missing a key fact here, but that would tend to exacerbate the problem, not make it better.
Yeah, the fabulism that has sprouted up by the likes of Sabrina Ederle and others really does a disservice to those that need help and that are potentially discouraged from seeking it, either because they think they're going to become a Rolling Stone cover story, or because they're not going to be believed because that same story became, discredited. And it's amazing that this culture that developed in order to try to promote victims' rights has inevitably undermined them.
So Lachlan, heading back over to you, Richard Bradley is one of the guys who kind of initially was one of the first people who dared to question the facts of the UVA story as it initially came out.
Don't forget Chuck Johnson.
Right, I don't even know who that is. So Richard Bradley, one of the things that he said in his lengthy post-mortem of the CJR report, which I thought was very good, was he said, look, the one thing that we now know was true about Jackie's story is that it proved that Erdely's central thesis was false. When she reported this, she was personally checked on by the dean on several occasions. She was offered counseling. She was offered the opportunity of pursuing the matter through university channels or through going to the police. She was recommended to a rape survivor group. She was taken seriously when she claimed that she'd been hit in the head with a bottle, even when there was ample reason to suspect that this incident was fabricated. Similarly, with respect to the story about the military, one of the things that I found is that when it was actually reported, they took extraordinary measures to investigate what had happened to this woman, going so far as to track down a guy who was serving in a combat zone in Iraq, pulling him out of combat to conduct a lengthy series of interviews with this man about, did he remember this woman, what had happened, so on and so forth. And I guess the question, and while I believe and understand that there's a problem of rape being underreported, it troubles me. Wouldn't you have to be the sort of person that we assume is not common in humanity? If somebody brings you a credible case of rape, to say, look, I just don't believe that, I'm not interested in investigating it, and moreover, I blame you for having brought it up in the first place. I mean, how common should we assume that sort of problem actually is?
Well, shit, I don't know how common it is, but I think there is the sort of inherent distrust of fraternities kind of as an institution, I think goes to that, and you saw that when Frat Pack, the political action committee that does lobbying on behalf of fraternities and sororities, came to Washington and started lobbying for for investigations to be taken out of the hands of universities and college administrators and so on. And there was kind of this uproar about how dare these these white collar white kids come to D.C. and try to prevent rape survivors from achieving justice. Well, no, what they were trying to do was trying to put that whole process in law enforcement hands. Where it should be in the first place, in my opinion. Basically, what happens on campus is, I think, should be of secondary importance to what happens in a courtroom, because really, when it comes down to it, what we're talking about here are felonies. And that's sort of why I think there's as much controversy over it as there is because you see a lot of these sort of kangaroo court situations on college campuses where people are afforded the accused are afforded no rights to counsel or so on. So I think you solve that problem and you make the process just fairer, more transparent. You'll solve a lot of those problems. But unfortunately, that's kind of seen as you're increasing the burden of proof on the victim in those cases. So it's seen as sort of attacking rape victims. So it just becomes a non-starter.
Yeah, I think to me, I definitely get that the equation changes in a case where the accused is someone like a Kobe Bryant or somebody like a Jameis Winston, where there are people who have a vested interest in seeing that the accuser goes free. But to suggest that as the ordinary course of business, the default mode for a person is to not care about an accusation of rape, I think to be such a person, you would have to be, frankly, a monster. And I hope that there are not that many of those people who actually walk among us. So let's move on and talk a little bit about our final subject for tonight, which is the Walter Scott shooting in South Carolina. And we're going to go into Neal as our next panelist in the order here. Neal, have you seen the video that's of the Walter Scott shooting?
I have. It's pretty horrifying.
So I guess as you follow the chronology of the story, what you may be aware of is that initially there were just reports that the guy who had the video didn't come out with the video immediately. Of course, he waited a couple of days and took it to the New York Times. Didn't take it to the cops for reasons I frankly don't blame him.
Right.
But before the video was released, it was just kind of a news blurb, and the news blurb basically recounted exactly the officer's story. The guy fled, there was a scuffle, the officer claimed the guy was going for his gun, he was shot, we don't really know what happened. My question for you is this: imagine a world in which the video that we have now all seen does not exist.
Yeah.
What are the chances that the reactions to this story take on the same kind of partisan dimensions that we've seen unfold in a lot of similar stories involving excessive usage of force by police? We have, kind of conservatives on one side taking the side of the police, liberals on the other side taking the side of the victim.
Yeah.
And in the end of the day, the cop walks free.
I think following on the heels of the recent events, it almost 100% certainty that it would have. Thank God that we do have this video, and thank God that it wasn't in the custody of the police. Because. It clearly shows, anybody who watches it, it clearly shows this man running away. Even if he had tried to grab this officer's taser, which is in doubt as far as I know, even if he had done that, he was running away. What possible reason would this police officer have to draw his weapon and use lethal force against somebody who is running away? I mean, don't they teach these people an intermediate level of force? I mean, run and tackle him. If he's unarmed, if he's running away from you, if he's defenseless, you don't have any grounds to use lethal force. I mean, you might have been afraid for your life for a second, but I mean, for God's sake, it's just it's obscene. It's obscene when you watch it. It's clear this guy, the police officer, deserves to have charges brought against him. And I am thankful that there was video, in this case, because in the previous cases, there wasn't. It wasn't sufficient evidence to really show that, and it didn't. What evidence did come out didn't come out until long after it had been politicized. So in this case, I think we have a chance for this to resolve, bent towards justice rather than mob justice of one sort or another. You don't want to disrespect the police because they have an incredibly difficult job that puts their lives on the line. But at the same time, the police are public servants. They're there to defend the peace, keep the peace. And if they're roving around an unaccountable gang, that's something that we need to rein in. You've got police departments all across the country buying surplus military equipment. Why? What are we putting up with in this country? You think about what our founding fathers put up with. They revolted over unfair taxation and stamps, and look at what we put up with here in this country on a daily basis, from our authorities.
So Neal, that's an interesting point. Hang on, Jeff. I'm going to go to you next. You've raised something that I wanted to touch on in this particular segment, which says, gosh, haven't these people been trained on, can you run up from behind and tackle the guy? It so happens that I am friends with a guy who is retired from a local, very major metropolitan police force.
Yeah.
And what he told me was their hand-to-hand combat training consisted of 3 hours when they were hired, and they're required of 1 hour a year of continuing training on that.
Uh-huh.
Anybody who's gone through any level of combat training knows that 3 hours is ridiculous. You can't be taught anything meaningful in that amount of time. And I think that there is a lack of training in non-lethal uses of force with respect to police. And Jeff, one of the things that seems obvious to me that is occurring is that a lot of police are being sent out there without any recourse to force between no force at all and then either the use of a taser or a gun. I mean, they have no intermediate. I mean, immediately it jumps to anything escalates, they pull out the taser and use it. Is it time for us to have an actual conversation, a serious conversation about potentially excessive use of tasers as a use of force as well, because they're a potentially lethal weapon. And cops, I think, tend to treat them as toys, as a matter of first resort.
Yeah, I actually think that that's a really good point. I think that once upon a time, cops were far more well-trained in the use of the baton, and were far more well-trained in, frankly, in chasing down suspects. I was talking with a police trainer today, actually, offline, and they said, yeah, there is an intermediate level between, tasering someone or cuffing them in a very close range hand-to-hand situation and shooting someone. You're never supposed to shoot someone. I'll get to that in a second. And what you do is you run after them. If a suspect is running away from you, you run after them and you call for backup. And you say, this suspect is running here and there, and he's going on this street and that street, and you follow them as best you can. The simple fact that a person is, quote, getting away is not sufficient reason for you to whip out your service pistol and plug them in the back 8 times with your bullets. Getting back to what Neal was...
Especially someone, by the way, who you pull over in a car. So you have their license. You know what their address is.
Yeah, exactly. You can go home and they have to go home, all right? You've got their car. Their car is still there. They're not going to go anywhere. And he probably knew when he ran this person's tags. I mean, we know how this works. The guy pulled him over. He probably ran the tags. He saw the warrant for child support. He probably knew that before he even pulled the guy over. But here's my point. Getting back to what Neal said, there is a very simple rule about use of force in self-defense. And this is something that layman, Leon, you know it. I assume, Scott, you know it too. You are no longer justified in the use of force at the very second that someone disengages. Now, there is a very famous Supreme Court case that deals with when cops can use lethal force in a situation where a suspect is fleeing. It's called Tennessee versus Garner. And it's the one sort of accepted exception to this rule, and which is that if somebody is running and they have a weapon and you think that they're going to harm other people, the sort of perfect example would be like a suicide bomber with a bomb vest is running away. Yeah, you could shoot them because they're presumably going to go detonate it somewhere and harm other people. Even somebody with a gun, somebody who is fleeing from you and can actually kill other people, that might be a justifiable shooting. This does not even come close. If the man was still engaging with the police officer, that could be a good shoot. And in fact, that would actually be very, very close in some ways to the Ferguson situation with Michael Brown, where he was actually attacking the police officer. He may have been unarmed, but you're attacking a guy. You could presumably, you can disable them, you can knock them out, you can take their weapon and hurt them with it. But when a man is fleeing on foot away from you, I swear to God, we all saw that video. It just looked like he shot the guy in the back because he didn't want to have to be parsed after chasing after the man. And it's, as I said, I just get sick of it.
Let me jump in here real quick, though, and circle back to this level of intermediate force. This is kind of an uncomfortable subject for a lot of people, but, we've got a more diverse police force now. We let women be police officers, for instance, and we see sort of, since the police are militarizing, I think it's fair to bring in this question of women in combat roles. Can women actually use those intermediate steps as effectively as men? And if they cannot, does the training that the police force receive kind of reflect this influx of recruits who are physically incapable of performing that role?
The honest answer to that question is I don't know, but it is a good point, and it does make you wonder if women aren't capable of, for example, engaging in a foot chase after a suspect, a male suspect who presumably can outrun them, right, or physically overpower them. Then does that lead to a lowering of standards across the board simply to take into account their issues?
Let's get the rest of the panel on record here. I mean, who else thinks women probably shouldn't be police officers?
Well, no, we've already seen the lowering of standards in the New York Fire Department. Got rid of completing the actual obstacle course in which you have to rescue a dummy because too many female recruits were failing it. So we're already seeing public safety agencies getting just scuttling and throwing out wholesale these requirements in order to accommodate women. We're going to see this in the military as well. But I think even beyond, women represent a small minority of police officers. I actually think this is when we're talking about this intermediate use of force, if we're going to use bureaucratic language instead of just saying, why aren't we kicking the crap out of suspects anymore with billy clubs and fists? Number one, I think it's because there are less Irish on the police force. Everyone knows that we're the best. But number two, we have to think about two dueling factors here. And number one is, what has the baton given us? The baton has given us video of Rodney King, in which this man is high as a kite on angel dust and has to be subdued with, multiple batons going down on him. Whereas if batons leave bruises, a taser, even though it can kill you, does not leave the same marks. So it makes it easier for a cop to dodge these types of abuse charges if he just uses the taser instead of using physical force. And number two, on the flip side is, cops don't expect to be engaged anymore. They think they are protected by reputation alone. So if you punch them in the face, their response is escalate, 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 because I'm not to be touched. The police, I'm glad that police aren't called pigs on a daily basis like they were not long ago. But by putting them on such a pedestal, we add cops to women and cyclists as the only two classes of citizens in the United States that can't possibly be hit. And, and I think we need to change two of those standards.
Yeah, let's remove cyclists from that list, because fuck cyclists. So
Cyclists and cops, that's the risk of the hobby/job that you take.
If I could interject and correct one thing that Bill said, tasers, most modern tasers have two separate modes. They have a dry stun mode, which is where the cartridge stays actually in the taser and you shock someone, and then they have the one where the cartridge shoots out and actually sticks in. That leaves both puncture wounds, and it also leaves a record that the weapon was fired, and in most police departments you do have to file a report for that. But the dry stun mode
but when you do the perp walk with the guy later, he doesn't have a bunch of black eyes.
True.
I mean, there was actually a great item reported last week. I think it was out of Florida, about a guy who robbed a store, and as he was running out, stabbed some Marines who were doing Toys for Tots, and the Marine was surrounded by three of his Marine buddies, and the suspect had to be taken to the hospital with a bunch of broken bones in his face, like a broken arm, but it was all suffered when he fell off the curb, not when the Marines kicked the crap out of him. So I mean, we should bring that back, guys. But if the police did that to this guy and he was brought out for a perp walk wearing a cast, Gloria Allred would be the first person there to represent him for the use of force, even if he was just stabbing somebody.
So Scott, help me understand where we go from here. I mean, we've had now, since Ferguson and Michael Brown, we've had Eric Garner, we've had Tamir Rice, we have this guy, we had the fellow in, I don't remember where he was. Anyway, we've had a number of high-profile incidents involving questionable excessive use of force by police in a number of cases. I mean, is this something that's going to be something that just catches the national attention for a few months and goes away, or is it something that's likely to gather steam as we go along? I mean, especially, I think people are now getting the instinct now to, when they see police interact with cops, they immediately pull out their phone and start video recording.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going away if these videos keep popping up. And as you said, given the omnipresence of cell phone video, I think we're going to see more and more of these, particularly as there are a lot more media outlets willing to publish it. And I'm thrilled to see more conservatives, typically law and order folks, that are raising a bit more skeptical eye to the police force work. I tend to take a pretty friendly view towards cops, but at the same time, they have guns and they have authority, and that, as we all know, can be abused, and it is. So it's good to see more skepticism and more attention and scrutiny. Where do we go from here? Well, the first thing we need to do is get rid of public sector unions. I think that some of this, and I'd say a substantial portion of this above-the-law mentality comes from the fact that these guys are members of a very, very powerful union that has a lot of control over their bosses, being elected mayors and other officials. And until that changes, I think it's going to be almost impossible to have fundamental systemic reforms of some of the problems we're seeing. And I would hope that some of the leaders on the left, particularly in the NAACP and elsewhere, get that the role that these unions play, but I'm pretty skeptical that they will.
So, Lachlan, last substantive question to you, then we're going to go, I think, to the lightning round. One of the things that's disturbing to me, and that I've harped on, as I've talked a lot about police issues over the last few months, is I don't know how widespread the problem of police brutality or excessive police use of force is. I don't know, and it's difficult to get a grasp on that. What I do have a pretty good handle on, and what does disturb me, is that when it occurs, however often it is, I feel that there's a clear lack of accountability. I believe there's a lot of things that factor into that. One of the things that's been alleged for a long time by folks mainly on the left is that police officers have a code of silence. And police officers will tell you that's not true. There's no such thing. When I watched this video of this guy, Mr. Scott, being shot, obviously the fact that he's shot in the back 5 times is extraordinarily disturbing. Equally disturbing to me, if not more disturbing, is when the other cop, I don't know if it's the guy's partner, whoever it is, he comes into the scene. He sees the other cop pick up the taser and basically plant it on the dead guy on the ground. That's the most disturbing to me, is that the other cop is standing right there, watches it all happen, and does nothing. Nothing that I can see. Not a word is said, not, hey man, what are you doing? You can't do that. You can't be moving evidence around. Nothing. The guy just stands there, they mill around, they wait for the ambulance to come. What kind of credence does that lend to the theory? And how common do you think it is that is there a valid point that the police officers have a code of silence when these sort of things happen?
I mean, you have to imagine that they do, just because we hear about it. I don't think, I was glad to see that conservatives were getting upset at, this latest shooting, but it's very easy to get upset at a shooting that's caught on video, it's impossible to believe that this was, it just so happens that the one time that there's an unjustified shooting of, someone who's running away from the cop is the one time that it's caught on video. Obviously, this happens more, more than we know about, and more than any of us would be comfortable with. But is there really a way to prevent cops from looking out for one another? Probably not. Is that something we'd even want, or do we want there to be sort of a camaraderie among members of the police force that maybe has some unintended side effects like that? I don't think that's something we should necessarily be going after. I do think there are solutions. The body cam thing has gotten a lot of attention, although that raises its own sort of civil libertarian concerns. But I just don't think that's going to be a productive avenue for going about this. Is cracking down more on cops covering for other cops, because when you're in the trenches, that's something that you need to have sort of a cohesive law enforcement mentality that I think is essential for doing the job well.
So what do you think? To me, I think maybe we're focusing too much. Look, this Michael Slager guy, he's on video. He did what he did. I think everybody's got kind of a justified level of outrage. I hear nothing about this other guy in the video. Not only that he didn't do anything, but for days, the Slager's guy's story was allowed to stand as presented. And I think that if you look at the reaction of the police chief there in South Carolina, he was clearly stunned to see the video. He had no idea that this was coming, that there was another angle to it, that the cop had planted the taser on the guy. I mean, you don't think that there should be some level of scrutiny, not just say, look, this Laker guy's a scumbag, but we need to talk about the other cop who was there too?
Yeah, I think there should be consequences for the guy. You guys are, I'm not a lawyer here. There are other lawyers in the room, so to speak, who can say whether this amounts to some sort, a conspiracy charge or something like that. But I think it's naive to expect that cops won't develop that mentality where they cover for each other, and I don't think that it would necessarily be a good thing if they didn't have that mentality. I do think when something like this happens, they need to own up to the consequences if they find themselves in this situation. But I just don't think you're going to get very far trying to combat that sort of relationship among cops, nor do I think you could even do anything about it if you wanted to.
Well, I think in the final analysis, that guy, the other cop who was there, who was present in the video, he had to file a report on the officer-involved shooting as well. Be very interested to see what that says in the final analysis and whether he falsified that report and what consequences will come to him. So let's move on. We're going to close off with a lightning round as we usually do, something a little more frivolous, something non-political. I want to ask the panel tonight, what is the worst movie that you ever paid money to see, either in the theater or downloaded from Amazon or from any other paid service? Worst movie that you ever paid money to see? Scott Lincicome, you're up first.
I'm going to go with Anchorman 2. Maybe on a purely objective scale, it wasn't the worst movie ever made, but the fall from Anchorman 1 and what it has, how it has soiled the reputation of that wonderful movie has made me. I was actually angry at the end of it at just how horrible that movie was and how it has now ruined what I thought to be one of the true comedic masterpieces of the last decade or so.
They even had to repeat the best part of the first film, the Anchorman fight.
Yeah, it was just so bad. It was infuriatingly horrible.
It was derivative in every way. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
I cannot believe I actually spent $6 to watch that on demand. It was horrible. Horrible.
All right, Neal, what about you? Worst movie you ever paid money to see?
That would be Epic Movie. I don't know if you remember back in the 90s, early 2000s, back when I was, a young man, not yet out of my teens. There was the Scary Movie franchise, and Scary Movie 1 had me rolling. Scary Movie 2 was quite a good follow-up. And so I thought surely the same guys who gave me such cinematic masterpieces would do a good job spoofing fantasy films like Narnia and that sort of thing. And I paid money to go see this movie in the theaters. And it was one of the only movies
Epic movie came out in 2007. You were in your mid-20s.
It did not come out in 2000. It did not.
You have no excuse, Neal. You are rewriting the past.
It did not. Oh, you know what? You know what it was?
Cover.
No, you know what it was?
Taser, Neal.
I was living by myself in a different state, and I was very lonely, and I had no friends. So I went to go see Epic.
How is that different from how you are now? I don't understand.
How is it different, Leon? Thanks. Anyway, so it was just a supremely terrible movie. It's one of the few movies I was ever tempted to get up and walk out. The only reason I didn't was because I am such a skinflint that I was not going to let them get my money for free. So I stayed to the bitter end, and it was horrible all the way through. Close second, Iron Man 3.
All right, Lachlan, what's the worst movie you ever paid money to see?
I believe it was Battlefield Earth, that monstrosity with John Travolta, which
you
I
saw
actually
that in the theaters.
I did. I would have been like 13 or 14 years old.
Wow.
Me and a few friends at the local mall in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I didn't realize at the time that I was being indoctrinated into Scientology propaganda. But now that I'm aware of that, I hate it even more than I did at the time.
It made sense, though, right, Lachlan?
Yeah, I mean, I could feel my thetans flowing through me,
Nice. All right, Jeff, worst movie you ever paid money to see?
It's a split answer, actually. The first answer would be Patch Adams, But my excuse and what gets me off the hook is I went to see it with a girl in high school who I was dating, and we got to make out during the film, which meant that the quality of the film didn't matter. The real answer is Coyote Ugly. And the reason that was even worse is because I went to see it with a bunch of my guy friends in high school, and I will never forget what my buddy John said to me as we walked out of that film at the end of it. He turned to me and he said, "Jeff, you know what that movie could have really used is a lot more smut, because it just didn't have anything else going for it. It is the worst thing I've ever paid a dime to see."
All right, Bill.
Your friend said smut? Was he 50 years old? Was this an older man who lured you to the movies?
He was a nerd, Bill. We were all nerds. Can you just accept it? We were all losers in high school. I've accepted it. Just, I want you to accept it too.
Oh, I was awesome in high school and college. I'm awesome now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Leon. Leon, you were asking a question.
Yes, what's the worst movie you ever paid money to see?
Thor. I saw Thor in theaters. Thor was terrible. And the only thing that makes Thor better is Matt Harvey's performance tonight. And I wrote a little poem to celebrate it. It was a cold and bleak old Thursday when Harvey took the mound. He dug into the Oprah clay and faced Bryce Harper down. 97 read the radar gun when he fired off his cannon. He followed with a hook and change, and in 3 more pitches fanned him. With his mighty four-seamer and unhittable curves, he claimed 9 knot scalps as prizes. Harvey's the hero Gotham deserves. No doubt the Dark Knight rises. That one was for Joy.
All right.
Well, I just want to say that as a Nats fan today, after that game, there is no joy in Mudville.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught on to the cadence from Casey. I enjoy that. Also, Strasburg sucks. Let's just be honest.
Well, he's gonna get paid a lot of money to suck over the next several years after this one is over, probably somewhere other than Washington. So I get to go last. This is really not a close call for me. I was dragged very recently to see the 50 Shades of Grey movie. Easily not only the worst money I've ever paid money to see, but probably the worst money I've ever seen, including all the base case. I saw Carnosaur 3 one time. That was pretty terrible. But
you paid. But did you pay for Carnosaur 3?
I didn't. That was free. That came on the TBS.
Yeah.
So that one doesn't count.
Oh, and so who dragged you to see 50 Shades of Grey?
My lovely and caring wife.
Scott Lincicome?
Yes. Here's the thing. I previously did not believe that porn could be boring. Of all the things that you might could say about it, but now I know that it is true and it can happen. I'm much sadder for the experience. So.
Well, I think the point of 50 Shades of Grey was all the backstory you love about pornography with none of the actual explicit sex.
No, there was that. There was that, and it still somehow managed to be boring.
I heard that they showed a butthole.
Well, there was quite a lot. Listen, it was perhaps the most explicit movie I've ever seen, and like the second most explicit movie I've ever seen, Showgirls, just freaking awful, just an awful abomination of a movie. So.
Wait a second, Showgirls is awesome. Showgirls is a camp classic. I will not hear anybody talk about Showgirls in my presence.
You just heard it.
Stop saying camp when you mean prison, Joy. Come on.
All right. Well, we're closing off for the night. We're running out of time. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank my panel for being here: Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute, Neal Doing of the Federalist, Jeff Blehar from the Ace of Spades Decision Desk, and McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. As always, appreciate you guys' time and your contributions. Thank our guest host, Lachlan Markay, for being with us from the Washington Free Beacon as well. Thanks, Aaron Gardner, for producing the show, which once again went off without a hitch, as it always does when he is here. Thank you very much, Aaron, for your efforts. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends.
Guess what?